How's it going, YouTube? Coming at you today with another video, and today, guys, the video is going to be the meta tier list for the new format. This is really interesting because we just saw the YCS happen, and there's definitely quite a few decks that people are wondering where they're going to fall. So we're going to be talking about each and every deck. If I do forget one, ask me down in the comments below, and I'll tell you where it should go. Obviously, there's a ton of decks in the format right now, so it's not really that easy to include everything, but there are some that I did include on here, and then maybe I forgot some. But at the same time, we're going to go through each and every one and talk about the way that it could interact in the format and where I could see it going and where it is right now. The first one being Fluenderies. I think this deck is still 1.5. It's a very strong deck right now. It's a very cheap deck as well. So if you need something to pick up, this is probably a really good pick, honestly. A lot of blowout cards, D-Shifter, Featherstorm, just all the crazy evenlies and a lot of consistency. But also still a lot of inconsistency. That's the downfall of Bird, is sometimes you just don't see a Bird, and that is unfortunate. Or you don't see like Bird plus Advent or Bird plus Map, and then all of a sudden you lose to a Veiler. It does happen, but at the same time, this deck is still very good and something that you still have to respect. So absolutely, this will be on the top of my list here at 1.5. I think the deck is still pretty scary to play against for the most part, so something to consider. The next deck here is going to be Plunder Patrol. I've always put this at tier 2. I think this deck is still very good. It's something that can catch you off guard. The Adventure variant, the Go Second variant, even more of like a pure variant or the Runic variant. A lot of different ways you have to understand about like what this deck can do. And then you also have to know which variant you're playing against at the time, and then adjust accordingly. All the cards float, and I think that's really good too. This is a deck where if you're not prepared for it, it can really catch you off guard. So definitely make sure that you are prepared for this deck. It's still very strong, and something that I'd highly recommend to pick up if you're looking for a very fun deck to play that is still very good too. Dragon, this is actually going to be an interesting one. I know that people might expect this to be a little higher. I'm actually going to put it in tier 2. Probably high tier 2. I don't think that Dragon is like super crazy right now. I think it's fine. But at the same time, we didn't really see a lot of it at the YCS either. I think there's just a lot of other decks right now that just outshine this. Especially if you're playing against a deck like Rescue, I think it's just objectively better than Dragon right now. That or even like Flu. So again, all these decks are going to go in the order of the want to play for each one, right? Because I would want to play Flu before I played Dragon right now. Or I would want to play like a Rescue before Flu, right? So I think that's going to be really important to note as we go through this. But I do think that Dragon is still lacking a lot of power currently. The ban list didn't really hurt it that much, and it's still pretty strong. But there's still just like a lot of other options that are much better at the moment. Talking about a deck that I wouldn't play, unfortunately, is still Striker. Striker is not that good at the moment. It's like fine if you play against decks like Rescue because you have a lot of interaction with decks like that. But at the same time, there's just too many decks that are doing two huge explosive boards right now, and you can't really do much to that. Because like you can crack the board, but being able to set up your own board besides flipping like a TC Boo isn't really gonna do a whole lot. So like right now, still unplayable, but hopefully soon we are getting some new cards, so we'll see if that's any better. Hopefully in the future we get some new quick plays or a better engage or something like that, you know. I don't really know how you could do a better engage, but you know, like more cards, you know, maybe a third engage, we'll see. But you know, I still love playing this deck. It's a lot of fun, but right now I just wouldn't play it. As far as Runic variants go, I'm just going to pull two of these up right now. The Live Twin Runic Sprite is probably just sitting in Rogue right now. I don't think it's like a bad deck. Droll isn't super common right now, so I would say that it's probably fine to play this, but just know that there are Bestials hanging around the format, so this is still not going to be the best option. I still think that if you're looking for a solid Runic deck, it's still just the For Hire variant. With tier being very popular and having the shufflers and a lot of decks right now that just don't really care too much about the Runic cards, especially when Flu is really popular in the meta, Runic becomes way worse because just any banish is really good for a Flu player. So at the same time, the Runic decks fall a little lower for me right now, but the For Hire deck is probably still the best Runic variant right now. But I still think that Live Twin has a lot of merit. It's still a very good deck. On the Wooden playlist is still Sword Soul. This deck is still very linear as to what it does. It's not like super good. It doesn't really do a whole lot. Nothing has really changed either as far as support goes. So I still wouldn't play this deck, but at the same time, I could always see potential for it in the format. The next deck up here is going to be Dark World. This is still going to be in Rogue, even though there's like Jen and Ken and like all the really cool things that you can do in this deck, i.e. rip your hand away, which is super fun and interactive, right? I think that's not always my favorite thing to hear in a format. I would say that my number one most hated thing in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is whenever we get into a format that's just like hand rip central. But at the same time, you know, like shout out to Galzo for the disturbance tech. But, you know, at the same point, Dark World, it's an interesting deck. But again, Visuals are hanging around the format. So not the best deck to pick up right now. But it's certainly something that you have to think about when you go to a tournament because you might play against one. Branded Chimera, this is going to be solid tier 2. All the hand traps that you can run in this deck are really good. I think the hand traps aren't super popular right now, but they are starting to be around. Playing a deck like Branded Chimera, being able to have a lot of power, and then also being able to play cards like Dragoon, super solid. I really do like Branded Chimera still, even though I'm not playing it at the moment. I think that the amount of non-engine that you can run is always very good for me in a deck. That's what I usually go for. I do think that Chimera has a lot of merit to it. It's probably even higher into the tier 2s right now. This deck is still very strong and still relatively cheap. It's around $100, so definitely something to think about if you want to pick up a pretty solid deck for the moment that'll probably avoid a ban list. The next one up here is going to be a surprise for everyone. I'm putting Vanadium up in 1.5. I know this might be like, whoa, that's a little too high, but I do think that the amount of results that this deck consistently does get, and it does make its way into every top cut for the most part, and how well it did at this YCS2 with the new Ultra Rare out of Agov, I do think that this deck has a lot of merit. There's a lot of ways to play it. We're seeing a lot of the tech options from Vanadium in tier as well. So I think that a lot of the Vanadium cards are just really strong right now, and I'm going to put it at 1.5. Slowly, this has crept up my tier list. It was in Rogue, then it moved up to 2, and now it's in 1.5. Just continuously getting cards added to the deck and still doing very well. I think this is a deck that you just have to respect. We're just at that point right now. Still a very good deck overall. Marincess, I'm still going to put this in tier 2. I think this is the best Cypress deck that we have right now. This is still a deck that can go pretty crazy. The amount of non-engine slots I still really respect in a deck like this, just because you can play so many and it's all just one-card combos. Especially being able to play cards like Goes and Match, a really scary card. So I'm not really going to say much more about Marincess, but I do think this deck is still very strong at the moment. Talking about another 1.5 deck, I would say it's going to be Tearlament. I think Tearlament is still very strong. This is a deck that did see multiple tops in top 16. This is a deck that still is very scary to play against. I would say this is probably higher up in the 1.5. Just because this deck has so many ways to be so explosive, and there's so many different variants of it. If you look at all the different builds, they're all very similar, but they're all very different too, because they all play very different as far as what you're trying to turbo out and the different tech options you're playing to do so. And I do think that tier is going to be very strong moving forward into the format. I do like this deck quite a lot. Now, this is going to be an interesting one. I don't know how everyone's going to feel about this, but I do think that the top of tier 2 right now is looking like Labyrinth. Labyrinth had near no showing at the YCS. I think there was one slot in the top 32, maybe one more. I think that Labyrinth really fell off. There's not a whole lot to say about Labyrinth right now, except that like the power ceiling of this deck isn't super high, and it's falling off quite dramatically right now. So I would probably steer away from Lab. It's still like fine. I don't think that there's anything like bad about it, but I don't think that it's like super strong right now, if that makes sense. I think there's just like so many other options. Like we haven't even hit tier 1 yet, and Lab just would not be in any of the 6 that I would put before it. So I think that is definitely going to be in tier 2. And like someone's saying in chat right now too, Rollback comes out in January, and that's going to be a huge buff for Labyrinth. It's also going to be a huge buff for tier because you can like mill Rollback in the Eradicator, but that's a whole nother thing. So we'll see what happens with Lab whenever it's going to be with the new card. But right now, it's like top of tier 2. It's not really doing that good. As far as Rika goes, this is still just tier 2. I don't think this is like super crazy. It's still fine. Folds to a lot of hand traps though, unfortunately, especially Droll. I think the deck still deserves respect to be like tier 2, but I don't think that it's much past that. And we only saw, I think, like one in top 32 as well. It's definitely an interesting deck, but takes a really good pilot, and then also the deck itself needs to dodge hand traps. So we'll see how that goes in the future. We are getting some new aroma cards, and those cards are kind of broken. So we'll see how this goes. But at the time, I think that this is a deck that we'll have to wait and see results. The next one here being Mathmech. This is just going to go in Rogue. Same with Kashtira going in Wouldn't Play. I think that both of these decks are like fine. I've seen them played. I've seen them still do pretty okay, but I think that I would definitely play Mathmech before I played Kashtira. Mathmech is still fine. You play a lot of hand traps and like rank 4 turbo. And then like Kashtira, I mean, like you can play the deck, but I still probably wouldn't. Just very big controlled deck right now, but at the same time, just not super crazy. First tier 1 deck is actually just gonna be Pearly. So the reason behind Pearly being in tier 1 right now is because it has an ungodly matchup into Rescue Ace with Field Spell. And I think that once Rescue Ace is going to be really popular because it just won the YCS and people are realizing how good it is, having Pearly with a Field Spell up is really difficult for Rescue. So talking more so about Rescue as well, it's also going to be up in tier 1. And then we also have Unchained. So this is kind of like the triangle, I say like triangle format we're going into. These decks all check each other, which is really good. I think that's really important because you have Pearly, which checks Rescue, and then you have Rescue, which checks Unchained, and then Unchained can check the Pearly deck. So it's pretty good. All of these are pretty solid. I would say any one of these are pretty solid pickup right now. Unchained, it kind of fell off before the YCS, but the YCS proved that it's still fine. Tier has another ungodly matchup into Unchained, so like that's rough for this deck to perform. But I would say this is probably your top 3 contenders, and this is like your top 6 contenders. If you're looking for your top 5, I would say like this would be your top 5, and then the 6 would just be Vanadium. But this is what you're looking at right now for the format. And then you got to realize like all of these decks are still around, right? So interesting enough, but still something to consider. Branded tier 2 as well as VS. Branded is like fine as like a pure variant, but like if you're gonna play pure branded, you might as well just play like Branded Chimera or like tier. So I don't really respect just like the pure branded deck right now at all, especially playing tier. But I guess you can still like puppet lock, and it's still kind of scary too. And the boards you can put up are still like kind of annoying to deal with, especially with branded red to ad libitum. Still very strong. VS, I think, also has a very good matchup into Rescue. So in tier 2 here, I think is definitely fine. VS also has another very good matchup into Unchained. So just being able to bounce everything off the board that is targeted, very strong. This might be a really solid format to pick up VS as well. I do not think this deck is very solid. I don't think it's very strong, but into the top 2 out of 3 matchups, I do think that it is very good. So that's something to keep in mind. I'm talking about a couple wouldn't plays. I'm just going to go through these. Got the Malfi Sprite, Trap Tricks, Synchron, Gold Pride. All these decks are all pretty bad overall. I think that none of them are actually like very good. Gold Punk Pride was in tier 2 for a long time, then all of a sudden it just like completely did nothing, and we thought it would do absolutely like something, you know, but it just hasn't. The other decks also haven't been performing at all, so I'm just going to leave them down and wouldn't play as well. The next one I have for you here is going to be Infernoble. Unfortunately, I still would put this in Rogue. I think the deck itself is like fine, but at the same time, even with Angel Ring, I think that card's like pretty crazy, but the deck can't really go second, and the end board it puts up isn't like super wild. It's fine. I know that a lot of the Labyrinth decks, and like even some of the other decks right now are playing like the Tribute Fiends in their side, which also can just really hurt Infernoble. So I don't really see this deck doing a whole lot right now. Like you can play it. I don't think it's a really smart pickup at the moment. The next one here is gonna be EXO. I probably wouldn't play this either right now. It's good in a tier, but as far as the top 3 decks are concerned, not super strong. You can play against Unchained, it has a pretty good matchup, but against Rescue and Pearly, you kind of get dumpstered. So like, I wouldn't play that at the moment. It's only good against like 2 out of 5 of the better decks right now. So I'm not a huge fan of EXO at the moment. Same with Salad. Salad's like more rogue. You probably put it like top of rogue, but it's still not really that good. The deck still dives to the same things. Like, yeah, you get a lot of searches now, and like if something gets destroyed, you can like bring back the new Link 4, which is cool. But I just overall don't think the deck is very strong. I don't think it's very good. So that's something to just consider. It's definitely a really cool deck to pick up, but overall, I don't think that Salad is very good at the moment. It just doesn't really compete with a lot of the things that we already have, especially if your normal swimming is cleared. It's kind of tough. And then we also have Drytron. I'm going to put that up in tier 2. Drytron is an interesting one because Bishals are around, but at the same time, like, if you don't get Bishaled and you don't get Drolled, the deck still effectively does what it did. And you can put up like the Amorphage lock. And I've actually saw this at top tables around me when I was playing, so definitely very interesting to see Drytron doing very well. The deck still folds to a lot of hand traps as well, but I would put it in tier 2 for now. I think the deck is still very cool and something that you could pick up and probably do pretty well with it right now. A lot of people are just not really expecting to see this, so definitely very interesting. Let me know what you think about all my placements on the tier list. I'm definitely interested to hear what you have to say. This is where I would place everything right now, though. Top 6 decks are definitely going to be an interesting format, and I'll catch you all in the next video. Thank you.